Hello and welcome back to Bitesize Boxing. So I just want to give my sort of initial preview and reaction, I suppose, to this fight between Canelo Alvarez and Terrence Bud Crawford. Of course, this is the big fight. A lot of people are calling this the fight of the year, and I think commercially it definitely will be that. But the reason I haven't covered this fight up until this point is, to me, it is a little bit of a strange fight. It's a little bit of a weird fight. It's one of those that, coming into it, I don't really know how to feel about it, even on fight week. I don't know whether to be excited or not, because recent performances from both guys has exactly been scintillating. Don't get it twisted. Crawford has looked better more recently than Canelo. Canelo's looked pretty horrible in recent fights, whereas Crawford, other than that Madrimov fight, has looked pretty impressive. That being said, I still think it is a very weird fight. I think one thing that people kind of forget about is that this wasn't the fight that was supposed to happen. Of course, we had Crawford versus Spence, which was the biggest fight in boxing at that time. It was the biggest fight that could be made. It was the fight that we all wanted. It was one of those fights that when it got made, I saw it. I remember where I was when I saw the poster. I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely ecstatic. It was one of those that really just, what a fight. And in the end, a lot of people were disappointed in the fight because of how one-sided it was. But to me, yes, Spence looked damaged in that fight, clearly. But it was such a punch-perfect and magnificent performance by Bud Crawford that, to me, in of its own right, it was still an amazing fight because you're watching it just mesmerised. So I thought it was a great fight, and it was a great advert for Bud, and it absolutely catapulted Bud Crawford's brand. Let's not forget, although he was a world champion, although he was a pound-for-pounder, Bud Crawford was a niche fighter. Bud Crawford was a guy that couldn't sell a pay-per-view in his own hometown. No one cared about Bud Crawford commercially. Yes, us hardcores did, but he wasn't a guy that had any pulling power whatsoever, and now he's in there against Canelo. And as I said earlier, we forget that really and truly this wasn't the script. The idea was originally it to be Spence versus Canelo. That's what PBC wanted, that's what all the pundits were talking about, and that was what things were being built towards, on the basis that, Crawford won't fight Canelo because Crawford's too small. Crawford come up from 130, whereas Spence started at 147 pounds. Spence clearly had the frame to go up to at least 160, if not 168, with relative ease. So Spence was always the guy who was really supposed to be in this fight, not Terrence Crawford. So the fact we've ended up with this fight is a little bit of a surprise to me, and even the kind of timeline with this fight has been a bit weird. I think we forget, this got announced in New Year. I think it was at the beginning of January we got this announcement, and it's now, what, middle of September? I've never known a fight have this long of an announcement before. I remember when it got announced, I was just like, what? 9 months out? It's crazy. So I don't know if that's also playing into why I feel strange about this fight, but again, it's a weird fight. It's not one that I've been, I was pining for. I think there are fighters I would have rather seen both guys fight, especially for Canelo. I would have much rather have seen the Benavidez fight, but of course Benavidez has had to move up and they've kind of gone in their own different directions. So the fight itself, I think, is interesting. It's intriguing. I've seen a lot of people talk about the size of Bud Crawford and how big he looks. I'll be honest, I don't think Crawford, when he gets in there against Canelo, is going to look anywhere near as big as some people expect him to be. Yes, he might have the height on Canelo, but in terms of body mass, I think Canelo is clearly a bigger man. Canelo is a lot more thick-set. He's a lot more sort of endomorphic, mesomorphic, but like an endomorph in good shape. Whereas Terrence Crawford is a bit more of an ectomorphic structure. He's a bit more lanky and long. So I think the actual size, when you see, the size of their heads next to each other, the size of their legs next to each other, the width of the men, I think Canelo is going to be clearly the bigger man. You've also got the sort of where both men are at with regards to their primes. I think Canelo is clearly past his prime now. I think prime Canelo was around 2021 when he went on that 168 tear when he first moved up. I think that was the best Canelo we've seen. That was the best he looked in the ring to me, and he looked the fastest, he looked the most fluid, he was getting the knockouts, and the performances were impressive. Whereas recently they have tailed off, and they haven't been anywhere near as impressive in recent fights. And I think that is part of it. I think it is a comfort from Canelo in that he knows he doesn't really have to do much to win these fights, and he's kind of just sitting back and resting on his laurels. But I also think there is that aspect that Canelo isn't quite in his prime anymore, and Canelo just isn't quite the force he used to be. But that being said, Terrence Crawford is what, 37, turning 38, something like that. So Crawford is no spring chicken, so Crawford's not in his prime. Just because Crawford has looked better more recently, Crawford is nowhere near his prime. At least is not his athletic prime. Technical prime is a different story. But again, I don't think that Crawford is going to be at his physical best either in this fight. So it's still a strange fight. I'm still kind of in my head. I'll be honest with you, just from the outset, I do expect Canelo to win. But again, for me, it's how Crawford approaches this fight. Is he going to be prepared to stand in the pocket with Canelo? Because this is something that Crawford has done at 147 pounds up until now. Is that Crawford is a guy who, yes, he's a boxer, but he is a boxer puncher in the truest form, in that he will put himself in harm's way to land his shots. He's not one of these hit it and hop it merchants, which I can't stand, whose whole mantra is, swimming without getting wet, flicking out a jab and running. But Crawford is capable of doing that. We have seen earlier in his career him have far less impressive performances where he has kind of hit it and hopped it a little bit more than he has been recently. So to me, it's a strange fight still. I think just provisionally, early on in this week, I'm leaning towards Canelo. Canelo on points, probably. It seems like, that's the easy thing to say for every Canelo fight, Canelo on points. But it does feel to me like it's likely going to be that kind of thing where if Canelo has enough left, he should, in my eyes, be able to intimidate Crawford enough with the power to probably make Crawford think twice. And again, I just think the physical size will tell in this fight, especially as it goes later in the fight. Yes, he might not be as nimble. His feet are stuck in clay most of the time, Canelo's. And yes, Crawford is very fleet of foot. But again, I just don't think I think there are going to be points in this fight where Crawford will commit. It's just his sort of style, particularly as he's getting heavier, where he is going to stand in the pocket and he is going to trade. And I think in those moments, I can only see Canelo getting the better of it. Yes, Crawford might be the sharper puncher in terms of being sort of the speed of the punches, but I think the weight of the punches is going to be with Canelo. And I do think that Crawford will be intimidated by the power. And I think we're going to get a good read on this fight early by how Crawford reacts. If Crawford is coming out there and he's jittery as all hell, he's on the back foot and he's just, sometimes if you've seen Canelo opponents where they come out and you can see they're just like, okay, I just don't want to get hit. If Crawford comes out like that, which I think there's a chance he could do, I think it's a wrap from early. But if Crawford comes out there and he asserts himself, and in those moments when he does assert himself, he's having success and his chin holds up, then we've got a fight. Then we've got an interesting fight. But I have this horrible feeling in my gut that we are going to get maybe quite a passive Crawford who is afraid to commit. Although I said earlier that's not in his nature, I feel that is what we might get. I feel we might get quite a passive Crawford who might just go on the back foot and sort of try and not get hurt and try and navigate the rounds rather than try and win them. There is every chance that could happen. And again, if Canelo has enough left that I think he does have, if he has enough to intimidate Crawford with the power, as I say, I think that will be enough to deter Crawford. And I think in those moments when the fight gets physical, Canelo will be able to have enough success to win the rounds, or at least not win the rounds, get the decision. Because in that Dimitri Bivol fight, right, I didn't pick Canelo in that fight. I picked Bivol, but I said that Canelo will probably get it. And there is every chance of a similar thing happen here. I think if Canelo can make it in any way competitive enough, he'll get the decision. So I think it's one of them ones that I don't see Crawford knocking Canelo out, even though he punches hard. He doesn't punch hard at 168, I don't think. So I don't, and again, Canelo's never really been hurt. So other than against Miguel Cotto's brother when he was about 7 years old. So this isn't that version of Canelo. So Canelo has a brilliant chin. He's never been down in a fight. So I don't see Crawford knocking him out. And I also don't think Crawford has... Again, I just don't think he has the physicality to live with Canelo for 12 rounds. You let me know what you think. It's a bit of a strange fight. Again, I've been a bit all over the sort of shop in this pre-fight because, again, I still really in my head don't know what to think about the fight. It's not often you see a guy who is really a 147-pounder going up there against a 168-pounder. The closest we've seen to that was probably Golovkin versus Brook all those years ago, and of course, Brook got his eyes pushed in. So we're not really used to seeing these kind of matchups. So again, even in the ring, it's hard for me to envision how it's going to play out. It's a weird one. It's not something that we're really used to seeing. But again, logic for me kind of dictates that just the physicality of Canelo should be too much in this fight. But I will make more videos on this fight as the week draws on, as we learn more, maybe once the weigh-ins have happened as well. Maybe in fight week we'll be able to sort of learn a bit more about this fight. But you let me know what you think. It's a strange one. It's just a strange one. That's all I can say. But you take it easy, guys. Cheers.